for this if, in fact, they will not declare the state of emergency. Thank you again. Let me ask Congresswoman Jackson Lee, who has to run to a markup, to speak for a few seconds, and then we'll go back to our agenda.
Let me thank Congresswoman Lee and Congressman Scott, and it's a pleasure to be with Congressman Cohen and Congresswoman Fudge, and all of you. I feel privileged to stand with you this morning. I feel privileged possibly because of my faith, maybe because of my training by my grandmother, that it is important to be sure that we do the right thing. Congresswoman Lee, let me reaffirm the fact that we joined with you to fight to include the 99ers in the last legislative session in the tax bill. But unfortunately, the right thing was not done. Let me explain to you why this is not only an emergency, legitimately, but also absolutely without thought that we would allow individuals who worked to go without the employment insurance that they have paid for. Did we allow the Wall Street barons to leave without golden parachutes? Did we allow the Wall Street barons to go without bonuses? They say they've worked. Some say they deserve bonuses. Others argue that they deserve these enormous severance packages. What about the working American who has made this economy churn? This is a bread and butter bill, and I would like to side on the side of bread and butter, allowing individuals to live, to thrive, and to survive. As we see the mounting foreclosures, which has not stopped, and the failed system of helping people keep their homes, what more are we going to put on hardworking Americans? And so I support this bill enthusiastically, call for it to be declared an emergency, ask us to move forward, because who would deny a child simply bread and butter? And who would suggest that all of these workers are any less credible, any less dynamic, any less contributing to our society than golden age, bonus-filled Wall Street barons who have left with all of the money because they say they've worked? Well, I know that these persons have worked, and I join you, Congresswoman, in supporting this legislation.
Thank you very much. Let me now ask Greg Rosen to come forward. Greg is the co-founder and president of the American 99ers Union, which is a grassroots organization comprised of 19 smaller organizations. Mr. Rosen's organization and the advocates have been working on behalf of the long-term unemployed for a long time, and they're committed to building support for unemployed workers across America. Greg is a former marketing executive who has been out of work for 3 years, and he represents millions of Americans who lost their economic certainty with the recent economic downturn. Mr. Rosen is joining us here from Pennsylvania, north of Philadelphia, and really thank you again for being here, but thank you more importantly for your leadership and for what you're doing for all of our unemployed workers. Mr. Rosen.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Good morning. I am Greg Rosen. I'm the co-founder of the American 99ers Union. We represent 19 groups and tens of thousands of Americans from every corner of this great nation. We have come together with one common goal: to extend unemployment insurance for all Americans. This shall in turn save American lives, assist in rebuilding the American economy, and get Americans back to work. But these goals shall never be achieved when you have millions of Americans, most of whom have not had any form of income for 10 months or longer, in an economy where the national unemployment rate has remained at 9% or above for 21 consecutive months. Our nation's economic system is built upon the basic laws of supply and demand, and you cannot remove millions of Americans from the economic equation without seeing the devastating results that we see day in and day out. 1 million homes lost to foreclosure in 2010. 147 banks shut their doors last year as a result of soured loans and a weak economy. Defaults on student loans are growing at a rate of $2,800 every second, and more Americans filed for bankruptcy last year than in the last half decade. And why is this? Simply put, because the jobs have not returned to America. We live in the greatest country in the world, and it's time we bring the pride and confidence back to America as well as all of its citizens. The only way to accomplish this is by putting money back into the hands of those who need it the most, the longest term unemployed, those known as the 99ers. We must allow them to actively participate in the American economy. as consumer spending accounts for 70% of all economic activity. We talk about buying American, but we can't buy American when Americans don't have money in their pockets to go out and buy. The most effective investment we can make as a country is to invest in its people. I am surrounded by a cross-section of 99ers, male, female, young, old, black, white, college-educated, working class, middle class, upper class, all of whom lost their jobs through no fault of their own. If we learned anything from the recession of 2007, it's that unemployment is a disease, and it's an equal opportunity offender. No one is immune, and it can strike any one of you at any time. And if we stand and do nothing, I can assure you that one day you will be standing here with these once hard-working Americans. Today, Representative Lee and Representative Scott stood before you with a key that will assist in curing the disease that is unemployment, the Emergency Unemployment Compensation Act. This vital piece of legislation needs to be enacted into law without delay. Some raise the question, if we invest in this extension, what will the future costs be to our children? I ask in return, if we cannot afford to keep a roof over our children's heads, what future do they have? If we cannot afford to feed our children today, what future do they have? If we can't afford to provide medical assistance to our children today, what future do they have? In short, the future is now. I urge all Americans and all of our elected officials in both the House and the Senate to join together and transform the aisle that so often divides Republicans and Democrats into a bridge that joins us all together. Join Representative Lee and Representative Scott and vote yes on the Emergency Unemployment Compensation Expansion Act. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you for making a very compelling argument that our national security is really based on the economic security also of all of our citizens in this country. Now I'd like to ask Dr. Shearholtz to come forward. Dr. Shearholtz is a noted economist with the Economic Policy Institute. She is an expert in economic inequality, labor markets, and the minimum wage, and has written extensively on this issue of the long-term unemployed workers. Dr. Shearholtz received her PhD in economics from the University of Michigan. She also will help today explain why passing this legislation makes sense for our economy. Thank you again, Dr. Shearholtz. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I will briefly discuss why I believe the economic case for this extension is abundantly clear. I'll approach this from two perspectives. From one, the importance to the families of the affected workers, and the importance to the macroeconomy in helping boost this recovery. So first, the importance to the affected workers. While the labor market has now been adding jobs for nearly a year, we are still at the bottom of a very deep hole in the labor market. So in December, this is the latest data available we have for job openings numbers. In December, there were 3.1 million job openings. Sounds good until you remember there were 14.5 million unemployed workers in December. And when you do the division, that's how you get this plot. There were 4.7 unemployed workers for every available job. What that means is for nearly 4 out of 5 unemployed workers, there simply are no jobs. This is why people are getting stuck in unemployment for such long periods. According to a recent Congressional Research Service report, the number of people who have been unemployed for 99 weeks or more increased tenfold over the last 3 years, from around 140,000 to around 1.4 million. I don't think anyone would suggest that all of a sudden workers en masse are becoming less productive or less effective job seekers, so that now there are over 1 million more very long-term unemployed than there were 3 years ago. What happened over the last 3 years is that the bottom of the labor market dropped out. That's why people are getting stuck for so long. The data show that other than being somewhat older on average, the very long-term unemployed have a very similar profile to people who have been unemployed for less time. So they're very similar on education, on ethnicity, on occupations, on manufacturing. They're not very different as a group. The thing that holds the long-term unemployed together is that they have had the misfortune of being laid off during the longest and most severe recession that we've had in this country in 70 years. That's the thing that groups them together. They were laid off at a time where there's just not enough new job openings to go around. All right, so secondly, let me quickly talk about the importance of these extensions to the macroeconomy. As I mentioned, the labor market is still at the bottom of a very deep hole. The case for more government intervention to generate jobs is absolutely clear. Perhaps surprisingly, providing assistance to the long-term unemployed is one of the best things lawmakers can do to generate new jobs. And the intuition on that is straightforward, and it's been talked about a little bit already, that when you get money into the hands of somebody who's been unemployed long-term, they are the most likely to have absolutely no choice but to spend that money immediately on food, on rent, on other bills, so that money gets turned around immediately and goes to being spent in local economies on goods and services, which creates and generates more jobs. So spending money on the long-term unemployed is one of the most efficient things, the most cost-effective things we can actually do to generate more jobs. So this is why the long-term aid to long-term unemployed workers is consistently rated by economists in the private sector, economists in the public sector, as one of the most cost-effective things that we can do. I estimate that the unemployment compensation system created or saved 1.7 million new jobs in 1.7 full-time equivalent jobs in 2010. And with December's tax deal, our government just committed to spending nearly $140 billion over the next few years on tax cuts for the richest 2%. These tax cuts are unfortunately one of the least efficient forms of stimulus that we can do, since wealthy people are much less likely to turn right around and spend that money in their local economy. When the government spends money on unemployment insurance, that boosts the economy more than 5 times as much as the same amount of money spent on tax cuts for the wealthy. The bottom line is that we remain in a very severe jobs crisis, and extending unemployment insurance is a lifeline to the families who have been hurt most by this downturn. And at the same time, it's one of the most efficient things lawmakers can do to generate new jobs, since we're still at the depths of this crisis. So this is one of those rare win-win situations. I think the economic case for this bill is absolutely overwhelming.